Mr Speaker.
Just before I call the next speaker, just to inform members it's a split call, and the members speaking will get a 1-minute bell. I call the honourable member Moana Maki.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, Alfred Naro found one affordable house in Auckland, so now there is no housing crisis in Auckland. Apparently there's no housing crisis because he went on Trade Me and found one house that he thought poorer families could afford, so we don't need to do anything. Problem solved. Problem solved. Well, that probably explains why we don't see more action from this government on affordable housing, because they don't believe there's a housing crisis, because their voters can afford to buy houses in Auckland and around the country. So they really don't care about the rest of New Zealand who are struggling to get into their first homes. And we had an extraordinary performance from the former Minister of Housing, Phil Heatley, before the dinner break. And we all love the court jester routine, we really do, but I'm afraid I need to correct some of the things that Mr Heatley said, because we spent 9 years undoing the damage of the 1990s national government. We rebuilt 9,000 state houses when that lot sold 14,000. They did no maintenance the entire time they were in government. We started that maintenance program up again. We managed to go a long way to repairing the damage of the 1990s national government. So what did the national government do when they came in? Well, when they came into government, we had the global financial crisis. Now, a sensible thing would have been to have had housing as a major part of an economic stimulus package. That's what Australia did. $5 billion for housing. They kept people in work, they kept income tax flowing, they kept GST flowing, and they built a resource that they were desperately short of, just like New Zealand was. What did the National Party do? Nothing. They repealed Labour's affordable housing bill. That's one of the first things they did. They got rid of Labour's shared equity scheme because of low uptake when Housing Minister Phil Heatley instructed Housing New Zealand not to advertise it. Said, don't tell anyone about the shared equity program. And then they were surprised when there was low uptake. Well, we tend to take it for granted that schemes are more successful when people know they exist, but apparently that's not obvious to the National Party. As my colleague had said, at Hobsonville, there should be 500 affordable homes and 500 state houses going into Hobsonville out of 3,000. No social housing, because the Prime Minister of this country shamefully, who trades on his state house upbringing every chance he gets, shamefully said there shouldn't be state housing in Hobsonville because it's economic vandalism to have poor families living on sections that have sea views. Because God forbid poor children get to look at the ocean as well. That's our Prime Minister. How many affordable houses have there been? A handful. Because the National pays 17. 17 when we promised 500. They're not affordable because they were done through the government's Gateway Housing Scheme. The wonderful thing about the Gateway Housing Scheme is that the only people who could afford to access it were people who could afford a market home on the day one that they entered into the scheme. So it was an affordable housing scheme for people who could already buy a house in Auckland. And I know one of the young women who was one of those 17 people. And the only way she got into that Gateway scheme in the Hobsonville development was because her parents put their house up as collateral against the loan. That is not an affordable housing scheme, and it's an embarrassment for the government. We had the Kāinga Whenua scheme for Māori housing, where the former Minister of Housing, Phil Heatley, got up and said he'd fixed the Maori housing problem. He'd fixed it. And the scheme was going great guns. The problem was the scheme hadn't actually started yet. And when it did start, no one qualified for it because the way it was set up did not recognise that the individual families who were applying could not qualify for a Kiwi Bank loan. And Kiwi Bank were mightily annoyed that they were being required to turn people away from the scheme because they just simply didn't meet the lending criteria when the National Party were out there talking it up. And then we had charitable status being revoked for the Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust. If this government really cares about community housing organisations, then what they would have done is actually move to re-legislate to make it clear that the provision of affordable housing does qualify under the Charities Act. What did Minister Phil Heatley do at that time? He did absolutely nothing. And now every community housing organisation in this country is potentially at threat because of that precedent to have their charitable status removed, which means that money that should be going to build affordable and social housing would be going into paying tax that they weren't paying before. We need to build affordable homes. As Duncan Garner said tonight, there is nothing in this budget for affordable housing. If you look for it, no, he's not a member of the party, Maggie Barron. You might want to listen because it's true. The fact is, we need to build more homes, and they need to be affordable homes. And the community housing sector, who are now being required to be Housing New Zealand on behalf of the government, that's where their expertise lies. They are the people who have the expertise and experience in building affordable homes, and instead they're going to take over being the social landlord for this government. Use that sector wisely because they know what they're doing. They have the ability to make a real real difference. They are not there to do the government's job for them, but as we see in the next piece of legislation, that's exactly what the government's going to have them do.
I call the honourable member Eugenie Sage.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Thank you.